What's happening? I read old magazine nerds. I'm cool like Jay Dyer. I'm high status like Jay Dyer. Um, we were talking about the Martinist cult in the French Revolution that ran the secret right in the French Revolution, made up of not crypto Catholics, but crypto Gnostics disguised as Catholics, like Joseph de Maistre, who has been a major influence, or wasn't a major influence on Rene Guénon, the Sufist French Catholic who became a Sufist, um, and later influenced everybody from Steve Bannon to Alexander Dugan to uh, the guy from who follows closely with tradition, family, and property, um, Carvalho, who is the Steve Bannon type advisor to Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil presidency. And this is important because this is a BRICS nation. The BRICS nations are coming into part of this ideology, this global ideology. Um, so we're going to finish up last article from the last video. Please like and subscribe if you like looking into the critiques of the alt right and supposed traditionalist um, kind of religious based groups. I myself am a Catholic, and I follow tradition, but I do not like the term traditionalist Catholic because at the same time they came up with this term, there was something going around called the traditionalist school, which was led by Joseph de Maistre, and all of these romantic Gnostic type people. And there's a lot of overlays between these things. So, just resuming from the article, this is uh, America is not possible. This is a kind of geopolitical work by before geopolitics existed, by in name, by Joseph de Maistre, who was one of the leading intellectuals, major influence on Napoleon, but one of the leading intellectuals of the Swiss Habsburg influenced. Although this was well, one of the Swiss influenced, British influenced, Venetian influenced Swiss salons that generated most of the French philosophes. And what I was saying about the Habsburgs is part of this plan was to break up the Habsburg Empire, but that's how the Habsburgs and the Turn on Taxes family always survived. So I don't know if they would really be that disappointed with this whole thing. It was kind of anti-Christian at the same time masquerading as Christianity. But we're going on. America is not possible. This is what De Meister says in his book Considerations. And he asks, can the French Republic last? According to Meister's editors, apparently a direct response to Benjamin Constant's objection drawn from experience against the possibility of a republic in a large state. Benjamin Constant was a lover of Germaine Necker de Stael, related to Madame de Stael, um, from 1794 until 1806, when de Meister's book was published. Constant and de Stael were in Paris sponsoring Barras, and Constant took part in 1799 coup establishing Napoleon's rule. In this fourth chapter, de Meister insisted that nature and history together prove that a large indivisible republic is an impossibility. A large and free nation cannot exist under republican government. He proves this assertion to say that if you throw a die a billion times over and you never came up with anything but five numbers, you could never believe that there was a six on one of those faces. Fortune tirelessly throwing the die for over 4,000 years, republic ever been rolled? No. Therefore, the number is not on the die. Note the queerly hysterical cheapness of this argument. He first hints at the real problem. There is nothing but violence in the universe, but we are spoiled by a modern philosophy that tells us all is good. Now, that's not a modern philosophy, that's Christian philosophy, that things are good. Inherently, nature is good. He says, whereas evil has tainted everything, and in a very sense, all is evil. His editors explain De Maistre is castigating the best of all possible worlds, optimism that seemed to characterize some 18th century thinkers. Of course, de Maistre was not alone in this reaction. Voltaire's Candide, for example, included a brilliant satire and philosophical optimism. And look at today's general cynicism of the population. Everybody who are millennials tend to not be able to do anything without resorting to being ironic, making fools of themselves. They conceive of things ironically, internalize irony. They can't speak without irony. They can't embrace strong images. They can't be strong. They always have to be a kind of sleazy coolness to get by. Um, and it's not just the soy boys; it's the Giga Chads too. The Giga Chads have to be Giga Chads in order to get by, um, but it doesn't go beyond that. Um, I don't know if you quite understand what I'm saying, but maybe when we talk about Jean Baudrillard and his criticisms on culture, maybe we can understand this a little more deep. Um, De Meister's editors explained De Meister is castigating the best of all possible worlds. We just read that. This is the best of all possible worlds, is the loving idea Gottfried Leibniz gave the modern world from Plato and Christ, for which Voltaire mocked him in Kennedy. This Platonic Leibnizian heritage carried through the American cotton mather and Benjamin Franklin is the central issue. De Maistre lets the underlying rage of this faction spill out in a way that he shocks us across the centuries. He says, not only do I doubt the stability of the American government, but the particular establishments of the English America inspired no confidence in me. The sites, for example, animated by hardly respectable jealousy, have not been able to agree as to where the Congress should meet. None of them wanted to concede the honor to the other. In consequence, they have decided to build a new city to the capital. They have done and chosen a very favorable location on the banks of a great river and decreed that the city should be called Washington. The site of all the public buildings have been marked out. The work has begun. The plan for the Queen City has already made the rounds in Europe. Essentially, there's nothing in all of this that surpasses human power. A city may easily be built. Nevertheless, there's too much deliberation, too much humanity in this business, and one could bet 1,000 to 1 that the city will not be built, that it will not be called Washington, and that the Congress will not meet there. The madness and wreckage that defeated Napoleon left behind the American model of the Europe the time being, but de Meister was not an accurate forecaster on the destiny of nations. The United States survived the Civil War, despite sponsorship of insurgent slave owners by the British and French junior partner under Bonaparte's nephew Napoleon III. Not only survived, did the impossible. Abraham Lincoln radically nationalist economics, transforming America into the world's greatest industrial power within 20 years. The example of America's Promethean success under high tariffs and huge public investments was deliberately placed before Bismarck's Germany, Alexander II's Russia, Meiji Japan, Sun Yat-sen's China, Arthur Griffith's Ireland, M.G. Renaud's India, Carlos de Olagabel's Mexico, and Rafael Nunez's Colombia. The impending end of peasant backwardness, the age of electricity, steel mills, and power transport under explicitly anti imperial politics meant the coming end of the world power for the finance oligarchs. In this global showdown, 3 U.S. presidents were shot down: Lincoln, James Garfield, and William McKinley. And America's European enemies assembled a new version of the assault weapon earlier employed in France. Joseph de Maistre's work was the glue for the imperial bankers' politics, including the insistence that the executioner assassin is all that holds society together, and his demands for the church to rule a world from the reason and progress have been vanished, a world under high powers which are candidly the opposite of God. The new imperial techniques of that era were built upon the array of manipulation that had gone into the Beast Project. Napoleon, a Martinist magician cohort of the Maistre, named, and remember the Martinists are the pseudo-Catholic crypto-Gnostics, named Fabre d'Olivet, had been hired as the top official of Napoleon's War Department. As a cult advisor, he too whispered to Bonaparte on the providence and the triumph of the will. As the influence of America's sovereign nation success began transforming Germany in 1878, the students of Olivet and de Maistre were formed into a distinctive movement which became known as Synarchism. Saint Ives de Alveyader, in his book Mission des Souverains, continued de Meister's attack, calling the 1648 Peace of Westphalia an anarchist republic of power armed against each other. That the fundamental law of sovereignty of force obliges under the penalty of death to function in this fashion until the abrogation and replacement of this law by a better one. The better law, synarchism, is the dissolution of nations into the night of bankers' dictatorship. Um, George W.F. Hegel put his admiration for Bonaparte's evil at the center of his concept of the end of history. He says, Robespierre set up virtue and terror as the order of the day. The tyranny could not last, for all interest revolted against the terribly consistent liberty in so fanatical shape. An organized government is introduced analogous to the one that had been displaced. Further coups proved the necessity of a governmental power. Napoleon restored it as military power, established himself as an individual will at the head of state. He knew how to rule and soon settled the internal affairs of France. But the antithesis of good feeling and mistrust made it apparent. Thus, agitation and unrest are perpetuated. For Hegel, the cycle witnessed Jacobin mobs, tyrants, and again, when necessary, new mobs, was now to be the permanent form of governing powerless mankind. The pathetic Francis Fukuyama, he was recently discussed something called the end of um, history. I forget when that was. Maybe 2000. After 2008, he was popular again because it was the end of like economic history. Like these things could never happen again. Um, the pathetic Francis Fukuyama directly revised Hegel's end of history filth for today's neoconservatives. Friedrich Nietzsche called the one whom Die Meister and die Olive and Hegel summoned to bring order out of chaos the Superman. Here we go again. Comic ball. By acting without any humanity, the absolute brilliant beast soars above the contemptible ant like rebel in Nietzsche's nightmare fantasy. These were the wells of experience and craft of the architects of Hitler and Mussolini, Bank of England, Governor Montague Norman, Lord Halifax, Lord Beaverbrook, the Warburgs, Lazar de Ferrez, the French Swiss banking axis, J.P. Morgan, Brown Brothers Harabin, Haussmann Schacht, Richard Keldenherf Kalergi. This was the personal tradition of the University of Chicago fascist Leo Strauss, his mentor Hitler's jurist Carl Schmitt, and the partisan synarchist Alexander Kolyevy. And it is the life model for Strauss, Schmitt, and Kolyevy's followers. Today, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Ashcroft, Berserkers, and the guide for their religious fundamentalist, actually pagan supporters. Unless they are removed from power, the city of Washington will be unbuilt, and the devil will win his bet. Um, so that's the end of that article. Uh, there's another thing that this is where another Habsburg, the long-standing Habsburg connection, comes to this. And remember, we are looking at this event where Steve Bannon and Gloria Tournontaxis, who is also the head of the Knights of Malta in America, I believe, or at least at the head of the Knights of Malta in America. Um, we're looking at this from the standpoint of Steve Bannon and her running a salon for the supposed alt-right. Um, with all of these people, I mean Cardinal Burke, but then also all of these followers of Rene Guénon, just like Steve Bannon is one of them, um, and how that comes down from Joseph de Maistre. Well, there is yet another connection here, and that is the origin of the Cathars and the Habsburg myth of their relationship to Christ. So this is a very long thing from a matterofmind.org from Pierre Beaudry, who's another LaRouche movement guy in Canada. But he's wrote extensively on the subject of synarchy, and maybe we'll try to get through some of his works on it later on. But here's a quote. The Cathars were originally imported into southern France in the Languedoc region from Bulgaria, where was spawned the cult of Bogomils, otherwise known as the Buggers, a radical religious cult that rejected procreation as dirty and sinful, but vented their sexual impulses on each other. They had networks all across Europe, in France, Germany, Italy, Bosnia, Croatia, and Bulgaria and Switzerland. In France, the cult had been organized around the estates of the Duke of Toulouse during the papacy of Innocent III. Now, isn't that strange? um, Innocent the Third, Fourth Crusade. Let me just make sure that I'm not getting this wrong. So Innocent the Third, guy that put together this monastery that Steve Bannon wants to start his gladiator school in. He's the guy that helped the Venetians and the Byzantine emigre start the Fourth Crusade. That all the Orthodox, who are also part of this, some of which are part of the Gnostic cult system that's being established, the newer Dark Ages system. Uh, that's the connection right there. The Orthodox say that the Catholics are responsible. Well, maybe not. Um, at the estates of the Duke of Toulouse during the papacy of Innocent III, the Cathars began to be chased out of France by the local Catholic communities around 1204 at the Montsegur Fortress Temple, which their members claimed to have used as a refuge for the Holy Grail. Now remember, the Nazis also went to these Catharian castles and tried to find relics and things like this. I think one of the major SS headquarters were there. There are close affinities between the Cathars, the Sufis, and the Kabbalists, or any other sort of blood and soil cult. The fanatical Gnostic Cathars resisted until 1244 when Montsegur was taken, and most of their followers committed suicide by throwing themselves from walls. The Cathar tradition, however, lived on among the Templars and different secret societies throughout the ages. Now, this could be woo woo. This is about as speculative as like Holy Blood or what the hell is it called? Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and all this stuff. During the French Revolution, the Martinist part is real. Um, During the French Revolution, Martinists such as Joseph de Maistre of Savoy and Fabre d'Olivet of Languedoc and Cagliostro of Italy were the more notorious. During the 19th century, one of the most active Martinist Cathar leaders was Charles Nodier, who became the Grand Master of the highly controversial Priory of Zion, a notorious blood and soil cult which circulated the heresy that Christ did not die on the cross, but escaped with Mary Magdalene and gave birth to the dynasty of the Habsburg emperors. So the center of the Priory of Zion is this Habsburg myth. Most of the so-called classic French cultural elites of that period, such as Victor Hugo, Honoré de Balzac, Alexander Dumas, um, Delacroix, Gerard de Nerval, and others were members of the Martinist Cathar cult. A reasonable person might think that such a myth is so unbelievable that its exaggeration alone should keep people away. However, this is not the case for the Martinists. Martinists believe that it is precisely because myths are unreasonable that they attract people. They assume that the common people will always be attracted because they love to indulge in diversions which are unreasonable. This is one of the most important lures that the Martinists have been using in their arsenal of lies, and this is the key issue that the synarchist Alexander Koyeve, the close collaborator of Leo Strauss, brought up to the attention of Leo Strauss about Roman Emperor Julian and his art of writing. Koyeve based his argument on the underlying assumption that since the very appearance of truth is totally relative to most of the theological myths, the common people will believe in them precisely because falsity can be made so attractive when it is dressed up in some kind of attractive form. So, following in the footsteps of the Satanist Emperor Julian, Koyeve peddled the perversion that in matters of theology, most human beings should firmly believe in things that are perfectly unbelievable. And this is partially why a lot of the traditionalist Catholics can't debate people like Jay Dyer and why they get mad because they themselves have internalized views that they believe to be false, that they don't see any sort of logical, instead of actually dealing with these things and trying to work out how can such and such be logical. Now, Jay Dyer himself is trapped in his own presuppositions because he comes from the tablet, which it's not. The canon means rule, it means meter, it means metric. Um, but both sides fall into this mythos, and both sides are being influenced heavily by Martinist type people or blood and soil cults in general. This is why art of Julian the Apostle and art of the Strassians are based on the art of lying. As Goyeve puts it, practically speaking, the ancient art that Leo Strauss has rediscovered consists in writing approximately the opposite of what he believes in order to camouflage what is being said. Alexander Goyeve says this in L'Empereur Julien et son art diacre. I can't read French. Sorry. This is how the current children of Satan and the Bush Cheney administration functions in the United States today, or the current alt right. Now, we'll talk about another cult, which this is how kind of the Islamic world is controlled. Um, but it, for some reason, all of these weird cults work their way into traditionalism, and especially traditional Catholicism. We'll see something involving Archbishop Lefebvre, um, and I also have an account of the people that signed the "We Resist the Pope to His Face" document. One of those individuals went and became a Mooney cult member. And the Mooney cult we've talked about before. It ties to Belgium intelligence, which is a direct tie back to the royal family in Britain, and as well as ties to the Council for National Policy. So here's an article from 1983, May 24th, Executive Intelligence Review. It's on the Sufi cult and other Mediterranean religions by Thierry Levy. I'm just going to read some excerpts. Before and during World War I, Arnold Toynbee, the historian and member of British intelligence services, supervised a Sufi project and other operations in the Middle East, out of which came Lawrence of Arabia and the Muslim Brotherhood. At that time, Toynbee was the international director of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, RIIA, or Chatham House. These same British networks have created the Muslim Brotherhood as force to oppose the British-supported Zionist movement. Among other reasons, later spawned Adolf Hitler's Nazi movement and fascism of Benito Mussolini, the alliance among Hitler, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and the Muslim Brotherhood was designed in London. And we talk about Sufism as a form of integrism. Sufism was thus transformed into a universal, ancient, and irrational belief structure which would bring together. And you're not going to see causality here because I'm jumping around to the points here. Universal, ancient, and irrational belief structure, which would bring together a whole variety of mystical cults. The person designated by the RIIA, that's Royal Institute of International Affairs, to accomplish this mission was a certain Idris Shah of Afghan origin. His family had served British interests since 1840, when during the First Afghan War, Idris Shah's grandfather, Naib Syed Amjad Ali Shah, was placed under the Afghan throne by British troops. Iqbal Ali Shah, Idris' father, was the disciple of Qadiriya. 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 I swear I did not get the whole word method in school. They never taught us the phonics of Arabic. Qadiriya sect, who became famous for his discovery of the tomb of Eve in Saudi Arabia. Among his many writings, he published a book with the revealing title How to Control the Spirits of Asia. And there's also some talk about tradition, family, and property that I did not see and I did not highlight here, but we're going to talk about that. In 1965, Idris Shah is named Director of Sufi Studies of Sussex University, a branch of the Tavistock Institute of London, created at the end of the 1930s as the Psychological Warfare Center for the British Intelligence Services. He was also named Director of the Institute of Cultural Research in London. A few years later, the British-American journal New Statesman, New Society, and the American Scholar ran front-page stories on the revolution of Idris Shah. So, if you understand the Islamic component in this system, why are the British letting England be overrun by Muslims? This is part of the program. From the period on, the teachings of Idris Shah were incorporated into Rand Corporation study programs and projects by certain J. Kermish and were used in training courses given to American intelligence officers and universities in general. In 1972, Idris Shah was also named International Director of the Ecumenical Council of Churches in Geneva. He had previously created the World Sufi Organization and the Society of Sufi Studies from his retreat in cobblestone village of Tunbridge Wells, south of London. Idris Shah's networks. Idris Shah's activities have served as a cover for the formation number of secret organizations in Europe, organizations which promote drug use and Malthusian ideas. This World Sufi organization, created in mid-1960s, as members both Johannes Witteveen, former head of the International Monetary Fund, and Alexander King, a founding member of the Malthusian Club of Rome, and the former director of the Science and Technology Department of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. The World Sufi Organization is made up of small groups of between 10 and 20 people, particularly intellectuals, a salon. Inquiries about the Munich organization have revealed that all of its members use drugs, hashish, cocaine, heroin, as a part of meditation. There's a lot of other interesting stuff in here. Um, Again, might come back to the article later on. But the magazine for study of comparative religions is directly linked to the World of Islam Festival Trust. And this is another um, group under Al Tajir. So there's this other character, Al Jabir. He founded the World of Islam Festival Trust, which was created in October 1979 in Geneva. Islam in the West brings together an anti-science networks of Alexander King and Aurelio Peccei's Club of Rome, the British Middle East establishment represented by Sir Harold Bealey, and Muslim Brotherhood networks around Maruf Tawalibi of the World Muslim Congress. The magazine for the study of comparative religions is directly linked to the World of Islam Festival Trust. Published in Oxford, it preaches the Sufism of René Guénon, a French Sufi who died in Cairo. So he's a Catholic convert, became a Sufi, influenced Steve Bannon and uh, Julius Evola and Carvalho, Alexander Dugin. Editors and regularly contributed to the magazine, including Fridtjof Schoen, Titus Burkhardt, who is a Swiss Sufi, Martin Links, an English Sufi and director of National Library in London, Rama Kumsaraswamy, a Hindu convert to Catholicism who was the official representative of the fundamentalist Christian current of Monsignor Lefebvre. So here's the SSPX, who I absolutely support the return to the Latin Mass. That is not to say that I think it's wrong for the church who found English church or something like this where you can have a mass in another language, but simply to state simply, the point of undermining the mass was multi-leveled, but the real opposition should be on the level that it's completely unlawful. It's against the laws of the church, and that there's ways to do it which are not going to upset everything. But they had to make this opera out of the whole thing, and the SPX current ties in with these networks. The same thing as the Michael Matt and Tradition and Action people who went around with this guy that basically ended up joining the Mooney cult. There's a lot of blood and soil type politics involved in this whole thing. And here's the SSPX's link into Sufism. But the SSPX also has its links into, obviously, the assassination of John Paul II. Supposedly, and I believe a rogue member did this, but Archbishop Lefebvre's parents were British intelligence as well, working under the British Special Operations Executive. The same thing that created individuals like Lord Conrad Black, Zionist, Catholic, media magnate, working directly with Mossad, friend of Epstein, friend of Donald Trump. I think that's all I had highlighted here because I just wanted to link that into. So you have this individual, write it down, Rama Kumsaraswamy, who was a Hindu uh, convert to Catholicism, as the head of representing Monseigneur Lefebvre. And she's a contributor to this magazine run out of Oxford, and the Sufist World of Islam Festival Trust. So you have this kind of Martinist cult in other countries that interfaces with these ones. Shoot, I was going to read the TFP thing because there's yet another um, link back to. Let's make sure this is the right one. Yep. Okay. Integrism is a religious project and a very precise political project of international oligarchy whose political power and vast private fortunes, or fondi, are at stake in the current world financial crisis. Civil religious wars are engulfing several nations in Central America already and threatening Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and France and Spain. So this was written in 1983. We go all over the place with this stuff. And here's something about Le Pen. The nations of North Africa and Maghreb are particularly vulnerable. Radicalization of relations between immigrant laborers in France and French workers, which is growing, could push the French workers to either Christian fundamentalism or towards fascist movements like National Front of Jean-Marie Le Pen. Islamic and Christian integrists in France and Spain are publicly opposed each other in deliberate strategy of creating political and religious tension. The fundamentalist cults are tied directly to both the international drug and weapons runners, but also to the Europe of regions terrorist operations. That is the Habsburgs and uh, the Kalergi plan, whose purpose is to subdivide European nations into a group of tiny and powerless provinces alongside ostensible ethnic lines. The two main groups of this are the Sufi networks and the Ben Bella network, and fundamentalists in France and in the Maghreb are run from above by the Nazi International. There's a lot cut out of this. In Europe, fundamentalism is led by a faction of the Blue Army faction of Fatima, of the former Portuguese royal family, the Braganzas, who were Habsburgs, and the Tradition Family and Property (TFP) in Brazil, group involved in the two assassination attempts against Pope John Paul II. In France, Professor Jérôme Lejeune, a close associate of the TFP organization in France and a member of the World's Federation of Doctors for Life, an organization committed to reestablishing the kingdom of God on earth based on genetic heritage. There's the caveat. Leads the Christian fundamentalist movement with historian Pierre Chanu, a member of the political mystical group called Maestra, with the word Maya in it. Chanu did not hesitate to play the card of integrism when he recently launched a call for no more mosques in France. The Maestra was created in 1978 by Oliver Giscard d'Estaing, the chairman of the April 29th Paris Conference of Islam in the West, patronized by Prince Mohammed Al Faisal of the Dar al Mal al Islami Bank, the financier of the Islamic fundamentalist revolutions in the Middle East. So you can see how things kind of all thing together. There's a pyramid structure, so the people down in the lower rungs of the pyramid, they don't know what the hell's going on, but it's still an organization. It's a form. It's not necessarily a everybody sitting together in a boardroom, but it's a forum of all of these organizations. And as long as they promote a certain scope of beliefs, the change can be affected. It doesn't matter if they're all in agreement with each other. And it is even better if they're not in agreement with each other because it creates change. Um, I think I'll read one more article here. Oh, so there's this LaRouche article written recently, August 7th, 2017, editorial to change the killer culture, announce a national mission to colonize space by Barbara Boyd. It just mentions some additional things about the alt right and Steve Bannon and 4chan. British desperados. Now she calls this a. There's no proof here. It's funny. What is 8chan, the forum for the two manifestos? 8chan, run by an American living in the Philippines, is the successor. Actually, hold on. Oh yeah, hold on. We'll talk about these so-called alt-right manifestos by killers. The El Paso shooter and Brendan Tarrant, because these are things that you're supposed to look at. That's why you're not allowed to say that they're fake anymore. Because if you believe they're fake, then you can't actually take the messages to heart. Um, so they had to get rid of that. You can either support shooters or be against guns. That's the only two options that you have in the mainstream narrative now. And I don't believe that everything's fake, but you have to get rid of that this even baudrillian um, skepticism about the nature of these media events uh, in order to make sure that the message is gotten across. So later in this article, we talk about these manifestos. The very first sentences of the manifesto of the El Paso shooter, Patrick Crucius, age 21, give the game away. He says, in general, I support the Christchurch shooter in his manifesto. That endorsement introduces a very rational and cogent presentation of repugnant ideas. Crucius allegedly posted his manifesto on 8chan's poll board entitled The Inconvenient Truth minutes before he went on the El Paso Walmart and deliberately mowed down Hispanics along with random white people caught in AK-47 machinations. Despite the coherence of his alleged uh, manifesto, law enforcement officials otherwise describe him as being disoriented and confused. A 74-page manifesto titled The Great Replacement, allegedly written by Brendan Tarrant, was posted on 8chan just prior to Tarrant's murder of 51 Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand, this past March. The extreme, well-organized propaganda rant begins with a circle divide into what are described as the main policy planks of the alt-right anti-imperialism, environmentalism, responsible markets, addiction-free community, law and order, ethnic autonomy, protection of heritage and cultural and workers' rights. The manifesto sums this up in the first sentence with Tarrant declaring himself as an eco-fascist. He proceeds to outline the necessity of killing off Muslims and non-white European races because of overpopulation. The killer, Tarrant writes, as Prince Philip and Henry Kissinger did before him, that non-white immigrants and non-white populations breed like crazy and will exhaust the Earth's resources. He says that he has realized the necessity of violent fascism when traveling through Europe, saying that he has witnessed the killing of white Europeans by migrants from the Middle East and France. His primary ideological hero is the dead British fascist Oswald Mosley, who I will add was the disciple of Keynes. He speaks repeatedly of the decadence of the West, saying that the dividing line around guns in the United States can be and must be used to provoke a civil war that would result in the balkanization of the United States into racially homogeneous ethno states. So here we have a clergy plan for the United States, and the ideology will be spread through 4chan, which is largely United States. You have a bunch of trolls from other countries, but they even have separate sections for international boards rather than the American boards, which tends to be, I mean, slash B and all that stuff used to be places for discussion. Now it's for gross anime and ladyboys and stuff like that. So it's pretty sad. But even the international B is a little better than the American audiences. So subheading British Desperados. The synthesized nature of the creed should tell the alert reader that these ideas, as articulated, are not written by the shooters, although they motivate their actions. So, what is 8chan, the forum of the two manifestos? 8chan is run by an American living in the Philippines. It's a successor to 4chan, a British intelligence plaything aimed to attract rebellious and labile young people, particularly those associated with gamer culture, angry nerds who have already withdrawn from social activity and have severe adolescent difficulties, particularly in relating to the opposite sex. Okay, boomer. She probably is a boomer that's writing this, but going on. 4chan had a channel called Poll. in which politically incorrect and violent postings were encouraged. It became relatively famous because of the association with Gamergate, a doxing scandal in which female gamers were targeted and violently attacked for trying to participate in violent video game. I don't think that's the reason. This boomer also says 4chan originally attracted people based on its promotion of Japanese anime, a Manichaean subculture featuring animated characters and often Nazi and anti-feminist themes. Posters are anonymous, and activities of the hacker group anonymous. Also, British intelligence creation. I mean, I don't like. Quit putting this fucking stuff in here. Excuse my language. If you don't back it up. But anyway, it is obvious that both websites or those participate in them have been tracked by intelligence agencies. I agree with that, if not totally operated by them since they came into existence many years back. The activities of Stephen Bannon with respect to all of this remains a target of investigation. Whilst operating out of Hong Kong and Hollywood, Bannon headed a gaming company called IGE that used low-wage Chinese labor to accumulate advantages in video games, selling the personas and images gained to rich clients who wanted to cheat at video games. Bannon helped persuade private equity firms, including his former employer Goldman Sachs, to invest tens of millions of dollars in the venture. In 2007, however, IGE faced pressure from gaming companies, a class action lawsuit, an investigation by authorities in Florida, and financial stress. Bannon steered away from IGE, away from its virtual goods business, but he's targeted and recruited alienated young gamers from this milieu into his version of the alt-right. Additional insight into the synthetic ideological underpinnings of these new breed racists can be found in the biography of Richard Spencer, the instigator of the alt-right side of the violent confrontations in Charlottesville, Virginia of August 2017, and the champion of the eco-fascist movement. Spencer's wife, whom he beat, resulting in a divorce, worked for the Russian Eurasian synarchist Alexander Dugin, another disciple of Rene Guénon and or the Joseph de Maistre. Like Dugin, with whom he collaborates, Spencer imagines the eco-fascist regime he's putting into place to be the third and final Roman Empire. Not surprisingly, both Dugin and Spencer are devotees of the Nazi crown jurist Carl Schmitt, and might I mention neoconservative Carl Schmitt. In other words, this is the synarchy that we identify as the children of Satan in the wake of 9/11, much like the ecological synarchist tendencies LaRouche wrote about in the New Left, Local Control, and Fascism all the way back in 1968, which we will be reading that article. We are facing two versions of proto fascist identity politics, a right and left version. Both end in the same place. If we are to rescue our youth and actually defeat the oligarchy once and for all, LaRouche's space program is our imminent opportunity to do so, and we do know what to do. It is the answer to how you change the culture. Okay. So there's more about Stephen Bannon, Richard Spencer, Alexander Dugin. I read the 4chan part because it's silly, but once again, if these are real events, it's having an effect. These are the kinds of people that are coming out of this magical thinking. This what did Bertrand Russell Huxley call it? Double bind. That's what these things are about. The attraction of these romantic movements is the double bind. And people know they're going to die. They know they're going to die for something. They know that they're going to fail, and it means they don't have to try, and that's why they're attracted to these things. They don't have to do anything except live out a story, a narrative, and that's what people are trying to look for is meaning, and that's why it works. The Integrist Movement for a New Dark Age. So we were reading this. Oh, we already read this. Cool. I think there's one more thing on tradition, family, and property. And this ties these groups into narco terrorism, some of which is running the cartels in Mexico. This is called Gnostic Hooks and Narco Terrorists Get a Bloody Nose in Ibero-America by Valerie Rush. The narco-terrorist apparatus, and this is 1985. Narco-terrorist apparatus in Spanish-speaking America was dealt several crippling blows in 1984, not at least of which was the banning of tradition, family, and property. Assassins called from Venezuela in early November. So you see this, not really anymore, but all of the anti-Venezuelan stuff, and people laughing at these people because we've put trade embargoes against them and other machinations that are going on, and people are fucking starving, and we're sitting here making it an ideological thing. Oh, you see, it doesn't work. I mean, ugh. The investigations that led to the prescription of the TFP have opened the door for scrutiny of other such sects like the Gnostic Church, which operates extensively throughout the continent and whose links to the drug trade and to the international terrorism have been made a matter of public record. In Mexico, the Nazi communist, synarchist, drug trafficking machine known as the Partido de Acción Nacional, or PAN, was engaged in fierce battle by the Mexican Labor Party and elements of the ruling PRI party as the key July 1985 elections that could be decide the fate of the nation. In each instance, Executive Intelligence Review published the groundbreaking intelligence which enabled relevant authorities and political institutions in these countries to administer bloody noses to the narco-terrorist network that plagues the continent. Tradition, property, and family, one down, 14 to go. Tradition, family, and property, the secretive anti-papal cult, which is also ultramontane, meaning they're pro-pope when and extremely pro-pope, and everybody who disagrees with the pope is a heretic. Um, when it's politically advantageous to the Habsburgs. Um, that's what this means. Tradition, family, and property, the secretive anti-papal cult, which hides its paramilitary training camps in the jungles of several Ibero-American countries, and which sometimes goose steps its way through the main streets of some 15 countries where it maintains its organization worldwide, was first identified by EIR as highly trained assassination capable of Europe's unregenerate monarchical pretenders or black nobility beginning 2.5 years ago with the publication of a series of articles. Now, since Plinio de Oliveira, the founder of Tradition Family Property, died, it's run by some probably aristocratic German cousin under something called the Pliny de Oliveira Institute. And this is the thing that interfaces many times with Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, as well as um, the Rene Guénon, friend of Steve Bannon Carvalho. The articles identified the pseudo-Christian TFP cult as a self-appointed army of resurrected Inquisition, which has been linked to the May 1982 assassination attempt against Pope John Paul II. The TFP, as EIR reported, has been photographed using posters of the Pope for target practice in the Brazilian training camps. This would have been Pope John Paul. ER details the ties of TFP, in which the operative word is property, to such royal pretenders as the Brazilian Portuguese Braganza family, the fabulously rich Turn on Taxes family of Germany and Italy, and the schismatic Lefebvrist networks in the Catholic Church. EIR also describes the brainwashing techniques used to turn its fanatic members into trained killers. In the process of security preparations for Pope John Paul II's visit to Venezuela in January 1985, Venezuela's authorities' attention was drawn to the TFP. The IR coverage, combined with legal complaints submitted to Venezuela Ministry of Justice by parents of TFP members in the country, spurred the month-long investigation by which the Organized Crime Division of Venezuela's Judicial Police, which led to a raid on TFP headquarters in July, followed by a second raid in October. Exposés on the dangerous nature of TFP flooded the Venezuelan press in intervening months, much of drawn from EIR research as well as dossiers compiling by the Enraged Parents Group. Clandestine TFP training camps were reportedly uncovered in remote areas of Venezuela with assistance from Interpol. On November 7th, congressional hearings on the TFP organization yielded damning evidence by several former TFPers, once of whom admitted that TFP audience had enthusiastically applauded the death of Paul VI, who they claimed deserved to be in hell. The Caracas Daily 2001 reported the Cardinal Eugenio Sales of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, personally sent Venezuelan security forces written testimony charging the TFP of plotting to kill the Pope. On November 13th, the Lucinchi government of Venezuela resolved to ban the TFP from operations anywhere on national territory. 14 more TFP centers are still in action. Drugs, kidnapping, and terrorism. When Venezuela's ruling AD party banned the TFP, AD Secretary General Manuel Penalvia told the press, "We will also be examining other sects that are illegally in the country. The Gnostic Church is currently under formal investigation in Venezuelan Congress. The Gnostic Church has not only been intimately linked to the terrorist M19 movement in Colombia, whose now deceased head, James Bateman, confessed that he was controlled by the sect through his mother, a member of the church. It has reportedly conspired with its Venezuelan counterparts in an assassination plot against Venezuela's president and its justice minister. The church has also been identified as a tabernacle of the global conspiracy known as Dope Incorporated." And that's another book by Executive Intelligence Review that involves the Knights of Malta networks as they were infiltrated by um, the Habsburgs and the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem in Britain, which is one of the primary centers in the Eastern European country of Bulgaria. According to a special 55-page dossier on narco-terrorism in Ibero-America released in September by Executive Intelligence Review, Bulgaria has been a hotbed of militant Gnosticism from the 10th century down to the present day. It is no accident, according to the dossier, that Bulgaria has long served as a major transshipment point for the drugs originating in Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That the Bulgarian state trading agency Kintex has been exposed in prominent media stories internationally going back as far as 1974 as a center of both narcotics and arms shipments, and the Bulgarian government officials have been fingered by the Vatican for their role in orchestrating the attempted assassination of John Paul II. EIR's attention was the first drawn to the role of the Gnostic Church in the narco-terrorist conspiracy at the end of July, when Colombian anti-drug fighter Patricia Paredes de Londano was kidnapped off the streets of Bogota. With her reappearance in semi-brainwashed and physically tortured state on August 1st, following an aggressive campaign for her release by EIR and the International Anti-Drug Coalition, a horror story featuring the obscure Universal Christian Gnostic Church was unveiled. EIR learned that the prominent leaders of that church, including Gnostic Bishop Jose Vicente Marquez, had been involved in Mrs. Londano's kidnapping. During her captivity, published Gnostic brainwashing techniques for the annihilation of the ego had been gruesomely applied. EIR investigators also took a look at the former Colombian President Alfonso Lopez Michelson, under whose government the Gnostic Church in Colombia was first made legal in 1974, and whose intimate ties to the Colombian drug mafia were made public during the same week as Ms. Londano's ordeal, when Lopez admitted into the major newspaper interview to conducting unauthorized amnesty negotiations with leading mafia fugitives in Panama. EIR discovered that Lopez headed a delegation to Bulgaria in October 1979 after his presidential term. He was received by Bulgaria's now deceased Gnostic priestess Lyudmila Zhivkova, daughter of the Bulgarian party chief Todor Zhivkov, and her husband, a Kintex official. Not longer after EIR's expose of the Gnostic Church ties to kidnapping, drugs and arms trafficking, terrorism, and papal assassination conspiracies, a detailed report appeared in the Colombian weekly magazine Cromos, which described the Universal Christian Gnostic Church as an intricate network of international swindlers and counterfeiters linked to the drug trade. The investigation of the Gnostics in Venezuela remained to be taken up in Colombia and elsewhere. The Party of Narcotics and Terrorism, subheading. In Mexico, a battle with implications for the whole continent is underway between nationalist forces which draw their heritage from the Mexican Revolution and their neo-Nazi opposition PAN party, whose sizable war chest is swollen by profits of the illegal drug trade, thriving once again in Mexico's northwest. Political support has come from the outside, the U.S., the State Department, and Ambassador to Mexico John Galvin. Circles in the Republican Party and U.S. media, such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Jack Anderson's nationally syndicated column, have all shamelessly embraced the PAN as Mexico's new democratic hope. The Nazi communist nature, synarchist nature of PAN became manifest during the course of 1984 when it consolidated a formal alliance against government with Mexican Communist Party, known today as the PSUM. So if you don't understand that Nazi communist, this is Nazi dash communist. It is a revolutionary system where the third position is align themselves with the communists. This is what happened during Hitler, and people on 4chan, etc. These morons don't understand anything about history. Stalin initially funded parts of the Nazi Party, um, and later on, he made sure that the Communist Party in Germany, which was controlled by the Soviets, didn't oppose the Nazis. He believed that the Nazis would bring about the Soviet Revolution in Germany because they didn't like the democratic socialists, because the democratic socialists, even though they were bad in our perspective, closest thing to republicanism. Um, so this is not something they choose to do, and they know eventually it'll erupt into all sorts of crises. But remember, you're dealing with Gnostic, romantic type people. They're not these masterminds, these criminal masterminds. Um, Still, though, their ideology leads them to operate in ways that are at harm to the rest of society. Um, Going on, the PAM itself comes out of the same network which controls the tradition, family, and property, and the Gnostic Church internationally. It incarnates the revenge of today's European feudalists who have never forgiven Mexico's Republicans for their 1876 execution of Maximilian, the Habsburg emperor imposed on Mexico to collect British, French, and Spanish debt. Habsburgs. Coming directly out of the Cristero Wars of 1926 to 29, which attempted to return Mexico to the Dark Age, the founders of the PAN were all molded by the Jesuits' Third Way doctrine. So look, people think Jesuits, oh, they're the ones promoting all the communism and liberalism. Well, they're also promoting integrism, Martinist type Opus Dei is more than Martinist type people, but they also promote the right wing as well. Um, Third Way doctrine, which embraces left and right wing terrorism of all varieties and war against both laissez faire capitalism and materialistic socialism. It was but a short distance from the rebellions of the Cristero movement against Mexico's potential to become a modern industrial nation, to the leftist student uprisings against the Echeverria government in 1968, in which PAM members played a key leadership role despite the PAN's right wing profile. Left and right wing extremes also come together in the drug trade, which serves as a vehicle for financing arms shipments and terrorist deployments. Look at Syria. Look at Syria. The now defunct 23rd. Syria, where you had a Knights of Malta, because this is the kind of feudal networks they're looking at. Syria, you had that Knights of Malta guy directly associated with um, uh, Eric Prince. You had that Knights of Malta guy caught trying to supply all these weapons to the Free Syrian Army. Um, and you had these other Knights of Malta guys in Iran Contra who, or they weren't Knights of Malta guys, but they were caught with Knights of Malta passports because the sovereignty without nation aspect of Knights of Malta makes it very easy to hand those passports out. Or diplomatic papers is not the same thing as a passport. They claim to only have like 3 passports in circulation at any given time, but there's other things that you can do. Um, the now defunct 23rd of September Communist League terrorists evolved out of the community action experiment set up by the local PAN apparatus in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua in 1966. Last November's spectacular government raids in PAN's territory of Chihuahua yielded 10,000 tons of marijuana in several giant concentration camps where as many as 14,000 enslaved peasants harvested and packaged the weed under the watch of thugs armed with machine guns. Feudalism, distributism. EIR's Dateline Mexico column and other articles have reported since 1983 on the investigations by the Mexican Labor Party exposing the overt Nazi ideology of PAN, its subversive alliance to the KGB run Communist Party of Mexico, the PSUM, and its ties to drug running and terrorism. Using this material, the PLM has campaigned for the withdrawal of PAN's um, So this the Mexican Labor Party has campaigned for the withdrawal of PAN status as a registered party. The information has also strengthened the hand of patriots in the ruling PRI against the insurgents. The dangers of infection of this is a pun they put in PAN Noria, a coin turned by the BLM, Mexican Labor Party, terrified Mexican housewives and politicians alike and helped strip away the anti corruption disguise in which the PAN sold itself. And this is the same uh, the same thing that Balancero in Brazil ran on, who has his own Steve Bannon, Carvalho, Steve Bannon's friend, influenced by Rene Guanan. They went on an anti-corruption ticket in Brazil. The Chihuahua drug busts as much of a political challenge to the PAN as a government crackdown on the drug trade, presage rough times ahead of the party for narcotics and terrorism. And it's the same ticket that Donald Trump drain the swamp. Drain the swamp. It's the same ploy in all of these countries. Um, but I guess here you see the Gnostic Church working with tradition, family, and property. And Carvalho is a Catholic, but also a Gnostic, former Sufi. But he claims to be a right wing traditionalist Catholic, influenced by TFP. He works with the modern TFP institution. It's just so stupid when you look at it as a comedy of errors. And this is something that can only fool people that live in either a place like well, live in the internet or live without the internet. If you actually go back and try to study history and world politics and all of this, you can uncover things. You can uncover reality. But if you sit here and try to listen to Jay Dyer for all the answers, or listen to Ed Opperman, I'm not saying these people are bad. Uh, I'm just saying they don't follow an actual scope of world history. They will only have ideological um, critiques. But when the very people like Joseph de Maistre, some of these other people who deliberately lie in order to pass forward their secret ideologies, you can't ideologically critique them. You can't come from a basis of philosophy because they're liars. You can only come from a standpoint of history. Does what they did match what they said? And this is the routine problem. This is the problem with Jay Dyer's criticisms of Catholicism. Who's to say that this Guelph ultramontane faction actually represents that's represented in the Council of Trent and represented in, unfortunately, Pius X, who Saint Pius X, who otherwise seems to be a great man, holy man. Who's to say that this conception and the Vatican I conceptions, who's to say that this conception is exactly correct or being misconstrued by this faction? And it is. It absolutely is. Um, One of the biggest things is Jay Dyer never considers the presumptions of law, like those things which exist before the law is laid down of how laws must be believed. So something like papal infallibility. Well, if the Pope intends to do ill, he can't be infallible. That's a not a presumption, but a precondition for law. It's nonsensical to believe otherwise, and that's how the law in the church has always worked. It's just this simulacra of the new church, this postmodern church, which is what it is. It's the response to modernism. Instead of understanding modernism, they entered a postmodern state where they didn't go back and look at reason. They tried to solidify things and concretize things um, in an absurd way, which yielded kind of postmodern level results, a simulacrum. Um, but such is the problem with romanticism and the problem with these romantic type movements, these blood and soil politics, these democracy of the dead type politics. Instead of learning from the mistakes of the past, and not getting into the mistakes of the charlatans that come around and tell us how the future should be. It's one or the other. We have to remake those mistakes of the past, or we have to follow the charlatans. And so I guess that's a good way to wrap this up. Um, I know that I'm jumping around, but it's going to provide a framework, and I will come back and try to put in all the sources so that we can come back to different articles and read the whole articles or whatever we want to do. The royal way, because I'm actually related to the Habsburgs. I'm a Habsburg agent, and that's why I'm handing this stuff to you, because I'm going to tell you a lie later down in the future. But thanks for watching. Um, Remember, vote for the Habsburg restoration in America. Um, like and subscribe. This is I Read It Old Magazines, and I hope to have more content like this down the way. I hope to have more top 10 videos because those are what gets me attention. So maybe we can draw attention to people on subjects like this, which is very important. This is something you've never heard before. This is something that people like E. Michael Jones don't talk about. They try to obscure these issues or simply lack the knowledge as a historian to deal with these issues. All right. Have a good night. God bless you.